In these challenging and uncertain times, it's very often difficult to find any sort of good news, particularly in politics, but we have some today for the Democratic Party because for the second quarter in a row in terms of fundraising, President Biden's reelection campaign has vastly exceeded that of every other presidential challenger, including Donald Trump. But before we unpack all that, if you haven't yet, please hit that like, subscribe, and the alert bell. So, folks, this is a huge deal, even though fundraising doesn't sound particularly sexy. Money and resources are incredibly important for political campaigns. I mean, they are arguably the keystone component, right? And despite the fact that Donald Trump, despite 4 sets of indictments in 4 different jurisdictions and being an authoritarian fascist, unfortunately, he has been neck and neck. He has been competitive with President Biden in terms of polling. There's still time for that to be reversed, but President Biden needs some good news, okay, in terms of his political election, in terms of the re-election, in terms of the campaign for 2024. This is pretty good news, right? So Q3 results are in, the third quarter of 2023, and President Biden and his affiliates raised $71 million. Now, the next best fundraiser is Donald Trump, and look at the disparity. Donald Trump only raised $46 million. It's a pretty considerable disparity between Trump and the president. And then under Trump, the next best options are people like Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley, and their footnotes in comparison at like 15 to 11 million respectively, all right? Now, that's just in terms of what they did in in Q3 of 2023, what they managed to pull in that quarter. Where the differences become even more profound is when you look at cash on hand. So when you take their Q3 fundraising, combine it with Q2, Q1, whatever, all the resources they had prior to Q3, and the disparity is even bigger. President Biden has $91 million in terms of resources to allocate to his reelection. In comparison, even though Donald Trump raised $46 million in Q3, he only has $38 million in terms of cash on hand because this guy is profligate. He's spending money left, right, and center, hand over fist, tens of millions of dollars in legal fees in particular, because he has to defend himself against all these indictments because he's such a corrupt, incompetent criminal. Now, when you also consider that Trump is technically, even though he has like a 50-point disparity in the primary, he is still technically in a primary against, Ron DeSantis, Nikki Haley, Vivek Ramaswamy, et cetera, and so forth. So there's been allocation of those funds to stay ahead in the primary. President Biden, in contrast, is basically, he's been able to be very thrifty with his funds because he's not really in a competitive primary. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. dropped out and is running as an independent. Marianne Williamson is technically running as a primary challenger to President Biden, but she polls even further away from Biden than DeSantis and Haley do from Trump. So President Biden basically has a clear field in terms of the primary, which means he can continue to fundraise and hoard all that money and build this enormous war chest that he can then deploy against Donald Trump in what is likely to be a very bruising general election. Probably be very, very close. And I write about this on lukebeasley.com/news. I write a bunch of articles for Luke. It allows me to kind of, engage a different part of my brain. I love to write, where I break this down. It's a really remarkable achievement and some much needed good news for President Biden because, again, right now he's trying to manage so many domestic challenges, thanks in large part to an incompetent and obstructionist Republican Party who has still paralyzed the House of Representatives. He's, trying to oversee the management of foreign crises in terms of Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the war between Hamas and Israel. So he's got a lot on his plate, right? And when you consider that Trump is still competitive in the polling despite all that, it could be pretty sobering. But this is really good news because fundraising, as cynical and unsexy as it is, fundraising is incredibly important to the efficacy and the outcome of political campaigns. And in this respect, at least for right now, Joe Biden is, he's embodying Dark Brandon, and he is crushing all comers, all opponents, including Donald Trump.